Hello, my reptilian friends, I'm Azalea, and today we're carrying on with some more Her Love Like Poison. Now, if all goes to plan, I might be finishing this today, I don't know yet. Obviously, if you're reading the title or the thumbnail, you'll already know. And, yeah. Last we left off, our main character Ethel was taken in by Mr. Brown because she was just not doing good. She also, earlier in the day, had been hacking up black goo and mushrooms, which, at least to me, I would have gone immediately to some kind of healthcare professional because that isn't right. Or at the very least, I would have refused to go outside because, I don't know, she just did not seem to be doing well, and that going outside wasn't really the brightest idea, but she did anyway. Anyway, last we left off, we just left Mr. Brown, and now we're going home. And with that out of the way, I'll jump right in. It took Ethel only a few minutes to return home, a fact for which she was grateful. While growing up, she had found Oxbury's diminutive size to be a negative. The village was so small it had been stifling. Now, however, Ethel was glad for it. It made it easier for her to retreat from Mr. Brown's depressing living room, and his equally depressing home, and return to her own. Ethel's home wasn't much better than Mr. Brown's. Ethel found it only marginally less miserable, but at least it wasn't so aggressively brown. Ethel had clutched her carrier bag with the frozen pizza and the Diet Pepsi in her right hand during her walk back, so tightly it had left a red groove in her palms. Her palms ached, and putting her food away in the freezer made her arms ache too. It wasn't until half an hour later that she set about making food, and once she had, she found she didn't much want it. The tomato base of the pizza was already luridly red, and the cheese on top of it looked like pus. Ethel hadn't been very hungry before she'd set out, and what little appetite she might have possessed had disappeared altogether. How could she think of food at a time like this, when she'd soon be seeing the girl? She was much, much more important than trivial earthly affairs like eating. Ethel ate as much of the pizza as she could, which wasn't very much, and tipped the leftovers in the bin. If Lauren had been there, she would have tutted about the waste, but she wasn't there. She was in Australia with her father and her two brothers. Ethel was on her own. Ethel whiled away the rest of the evening, and much of the night, as best she could. She watched more Supernatural in the living room, but she wasn't paying attention to the exploits of the Winchester brothers. They couldn't hold her attention. Like Kai and the Ice Queen, Ethel felt as though her heart had been embedded with a shard of cold, eternally unmelting ice. This shard of ice was Ethel's link to the girl. So long as it remained true, Ethel would never forget her. She didn't want to. When Ethel fancied enough time had passed, she finally stood. She stretched. Then, her heart all aflutter with trepidation, she set off. She thought about retrieving her anorak as she stood by the front door, just in case it rained. The sky did look overcast, the moon obscured with clouds. Ethel didn't want to be caught up in yet another downpour. She dithered, but she eventually decided against wearing the anorak. It was a big bulky thing made of polyester, and it crackled when she walked, like some sort of giant sweet wrapper. It wasn't very fashionable either. It was an unflattering, almost militaristic khaki green. Ethel had never much cared about being fashionable before, but she cared now. She didn't want to look too foolish in front of the girl. If she laughed at her, part of her would have died. Anoraks didn't exactly scream romantic moonlit rendezvous, in any event. It was better to go without. Even if she did get wet, Ethel could endure a little rain. She left the house, locking it behind her, and heading off into the night. She soon left Oxbury's cozy, cramped streets behind her, to the forest which fringed it. Ethel didn't hesitate before stepping foot amongst the trees. There was nothing to tie her to Oxbury, and nothing to tell her to stop. Nobody save herself. But why would she? She didn't want to stop. She wanted to see the girl again, which meant she had to press on. Ethel walked and she walked and she walked, her path lit by the moon and by Jude's old torch. Carefully, she navigated the forest, dodging a root here, a gorse bush there. The ground was uneven, and it was still muddy after the torrential rain from a few days prior. Once, Ethel's foot twisted, but she was able to regain her balance. She wasn't going to fall over face first before meeting the girl. She wouldn't let herself. She wanted to give the girl a better last impression of her than that. Eventually, Ethel escaped the tall trees which towered about her and stepped into the clearing. She could see St. Catherine's in front of her, solidly immovable, as it had been during the previous 2 nights when she had come across the aged building. St. Catherine's looked as it always had, coated in the inky darkness of the night. But there was something different about the church that night, something which made Ethel pause. The light wasn't on in the window, and the door was tightly closed. Ethel couldn't see that hairline crack in the church's entrance which had become so very familiar to her, nor the candlelight which spilled out from it. Instead, the church was sealed shut, airtight like an Egyptian sarcophagus of eras gone by. The church seemed hollowed out and empty, a dull, dismal shadow of its former self. Ethel approached the church hesitantly, her gait as slow and uncertain as a newborn deer's. Was the girl really there? Ethel wanted to believe so. The girl had said that she would be waiting for her, but she couldn't detect any traces of life about the old stone building. The nighttime air was cold, yes, but there was no breeze to it. It was as quiet as the grave. It seemed unlikely that the girl would be shut up inside the church, which now felt so very devoid of life, still singing her alluring siren song. Ethel couldn't imagine it. She was having a hard time picturing the girl at all, now that it had been almost a full 24 hours since she had last seen her. What did the girl look like? What did she sound like? Ethel was sure she had been beautiful, but she was sure of this in only a vague, half-formed sense. Too vague and half-formed to be sure at all. She had thought the girl perfect, but perfection didn't exist. Not even Shania, for all her pretensions to the contrary, had been perfect. How could the girl be otherwise? She was just, for all she had allured Ethel, an ordinary girl. Or was she? Ethel approached the church slowly, her soles crunching the tall, unkempt grass underfoot. St. Catherine's was a small, squat church, but its shadows soon swallowed her, drowning Ethel in a deep, inky darkness. Ethel reached out, her right arm trembling. She pressed her palm against the door, which seemed curiously impenetrable in the dark, the wood too firm and thick to give way beneath her fingers. Then she pushed. The church's wooden doors dwarfed Ethel to such a degree she was almost surprised when they gave way beneath her palms. The door opened with a low guttural creaking, which swelled in the silence. It sounded oddly alive, like a groaning monster hauled from the bottom of some dark, deep abyss. Maybe it was some sort of omen. Ethel couldn't help but recall Mr. Brown's warnings from a few days prior. His warnings about the mysterious missing girl. I wouldn't want you getting lost. You know what happened to the Delaney girl, don't you? Of course Ethel remembered the Delaney girl. Her mother had talked about her incessantly after her disappearance. But nothing like that was going to happen to Ethel. She wasn't interesting enough to be abducted, and her life was much too mundane. Everything about her was almost painfully ordinary. Ethel had always thought she was ordinary, at least. But the girl didn't seem to think so. She had always been affectionate, But did she really mean it? Ethel frowned as she gave the door to the church another push. Then she stepped inside. She was eager to see the girl again, to speak to her, to ask her whether she would text her when she left Oxbury, if she would still remember her. But the interior of St. Catherine's was pitch black. St. Catherine's, in the stillness of the night, was dark, the air cool. It felt a bit like stepping foot inside a vaulted, vast-ceilinged crypt, which Ethel supposed it was. That was one of the functions of a church, past being a place of worship. The flagstones which Ethel walked upon were built over a veritable mountain of corpses. This place was a living, breathing boneyard. People thought the famous Sedlick ossuary was grim, decorated as it was in ghastly grinning skulls, but at least it was honest about what it was. It had no pretenses. It was earnest. But this was something that people didn't always appreciate, particularly not when the topic of death was involved. Ethel inhaled. In the air, you could smell several centuries' worth of death. Then she turned. It was obvious that the girl wasn't there. There was no point hanging around. Maybe all of this, their midnight meetings, had been some sort of cruel practical joke. Had that kiss, too, all been a piece of trickery? Perhaps the girl was there after all, hiding in the bushes, snickering as the door of the church slammed shut behind Ethel. Ethel was unsure whether this idea appealed more than the alternative, that the girl didn't care at all. Being treated as an object of mockery wasn't nice, but it was better than being ignored. If the girl had set this up as a means of hurting Ethel's feelings, then she had succeeded. But that would at least mean that she cared about Ethel's feelings enough to want to hurt them. It was stone-cold apathy in the end, which would have really undone Ethel. Ethel stood mutely beneath the moonlight for a few moments, nibbling on a hangnail. There was no point waiting around if the girl wasn't going to appear. It was cold, and it was late, and the night sky overhead was overcast. Maybe it would rain again. Ethel didn't want to get caught up in a downpour. She should leave. There was nothing waiting for her here, not without the girl. But now Ethel was beginning to worry she might have arrived too late. Perhaps the girl had arrived after all, and she had already departed. They had never agreed upon a fixed time for their meeting. The girl had been maddeningly vague about it, as she had about everything. Part of Ethel enjoyed this vagueness. It gave their meetings a greater aura of mystery, but it had made arranging things difficult. With no fixed time to work with, Ethel didn't know who to blame for what had occurred. Had she been too early? Had she been too late? Had the girl come and gone? Had she never come at all? Ethel continued to stand there, divering, worrying at her hangnail. She bit it, hard, until the nail splintered between her teeth. She bit the nail too close to the quick, in fact, and her mouth soon filled with the tang of copper. Her tongue was tingling. Christ, Ethel sighed. Invoking the name of the Holy Sun, Ethel couldn't think of a more appropriate place to do so, as she did. What was she doing, loitering around outside the church so late at night? 10 minutes must have passed, if not more. She was being a fool. Why did she think the girl would appear? She should have learned her lesson already with Clementine. Hope only ever seemed to give way to despair. Ethel squared her shoulders. Then she set off. She would put the girl behind her, pretend this had never happened. That would be for the best. It would spare her fragile ego. Ethel didn't want to be taken for a fool, not when she felt foolish so frequently regardless. She stalked off, malforming and misshaping the grass beneath her soles when... Why, hello there, stranger. Where do you think you're going? Oh? Ethel gasped in alarm as a sudden, unexpected darkness descended, one even deeper than the darkness which had previously shrouded her. At least the darkness had been alleviated, if only a little, by the moonlight. This darkness, however, was far more complete. She might very well have poured ink into her eyeballs. Ethel couldn't see. For a few moments, she forgot how to think. Now, why have you gone all stiff? Don't tell me I've scared you. But a familiar voice, a scant few centimeters away from her ear, restored Ethel's senses. She recognized that voice. It belonged to somebody she knew. Not well, perhaps, but well enough. It was the girl. Who else would it have been? Ethel couldn't think of many other people in Oxbury mad enough to wander this far into the woods, all the way to St. Catherine's, at this time of night, not without a prior appointment. Why had she been so anxious? The girl drew her hands away from Ethel's eyes, then stepped back. She looked just like she always did, her dress simple, her hair short and dark. Ethel had thought the girl's hair, which was as dark as a raven's feathers, was pretty when viewed in the flickering candlelight of the church. Outdoors, however, it seemed almost too dark, as though she and the shadows were one undulating, amorphous blob. The girl's skin, meanwhile, seemed too pale. Her dress oddly flimsy, given how late it was. Wasn't she cold? Ethel examined the girl questioningly. Though Ethel knew her, she suddenly seemed like a stranger. Maybe it was because she had never seen the girl outside the church before. Ethel must have begun to link the girl and St. Catherine's together, coupling them until they were one symbiotic organism. One could not function without the other. The girl, without the backdrop of St. Catherine's nave, might very well have been missing a limb, or an eye, or her mouth. The girl's lips, however, were very much present, and they were curved upwards into a familiar crescent moon smile. Were you looking for me? If so, that's very sweet. Oh, yes, I thought maybe I was too late, or too early, or... I don't know. I thought that I wouldn't show up at all. Ethel fell silent. Anxiously, she gnawed the inside of her cheek. This wasn't necessarily something she wanted to admit. It made her feel uncomfortably vulnerable, but she nodded all the same. She couldn't hide anything from the girl. The girl's voice might have been light, but her eyes were sharper than knives. Well, you don't need to worry about that. I'd never stand you up. Do you think I'd be so cruel? No, I don't. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant... You didn't think that you were worth waiting for? Well, maybe. Jeez, I thought that was probably the case, you silly thing. I wish you had more self-confidence. That might be quite the big wish. I did get that feeling, yes. You shouldn't be so down on yourself, though. You're a nice girl. No decent person would leave you in the lurch. Was that so? Ethel sighed. The girl ought to try telling that to Clementine. I would have come earlier, actually, but I got a little bit caught up. Caught up? I was doing things. What things? Just things. It doesn't matter now, though. I've got everything under control, which means we can spend a lot of time together. Provided you want to, of course. Well, of course I want to. Ethel replied quickly. Perhaps too quickly. Then she winced. Why did she have to sound so eager? That was so uncool. Not Ethel supposed that she had ever been cool. Did people even use the word cool anymore? Perhaps that was also dated, just like everything else about Ethel. Her taste in TV shows, her favorite music, and her fashion sense. What fashion sense? Ethel wondered if the girl would judge her for her blatant enthusiasm. Wasn't it a bit excessive? But good, I'm glad. I don't know about you, but I've been looking forward to this all day. You have? Yeah, you're the only person around here I can really talk to. Or at least, you're the only person I think is interesting enough to talk to. I don't want to waste my time with anybody else, but you're special. Special? Yep, I said so it must be true. You can trust me. The girl giggled, and after a pause, Ethel found herself giggling too. There was something infectious about the girl's laughter. She really couldn't help herself. I'm looking forward to having a girly chat, just the two of us. But I don't think I want to stay in St. Catherine's tonight. Not when it's my last day here. I think I'd rather go for a walk. That is, if you don't mind. Oh, Ethel blinked. She was surprised to find that, for some inexplicable reason, that she did mind this. She minded quite a lot, actually. The word stranger danger flickered, unbidden, inside her head. Once more, she remembered the missing Delaney girl, who had vanished into the woods without a trace. But surely she was being foolish. It seemed unlikely that the girl meant to lead Ethel into the woods to dismember her. She didn't look like a serial killer, and neither did she act like one. She did not seem to be in possession either of a saw or any other potentially lethal instruments with sharp, serrated edges. Ethel was just being paranoid. Why was she such a coward? That's all right, I don't mind. You don't mind much, do you? The girl tittered, and Ethel got the feeling, though she tried to squash it, that the girl was making fun of her. I thought you'd say that, but it's good to get some clarification regardless. I wouldn't want to drag you into anything you didn't want. Now, shall we get going? The girl held out her hand, her stark white fingers extended in the dark for Ethel to take. I'd like to show you something. Oh, Ethel eyed the girl's hand uneasily. It hung in the air, suspended, much like the moon which hovered above their heads, above the slate roof of St. Catherine's. All of a sudden, the girl's hand seemed full of meaning, so much so Ethel shivered to behold it. A cool breeze blew about her, capturing the end of her plaits as they shifted. The cold was twining up Ethel's ankles. It was brushing against her knees, the inside of her thighs. She couldn't stop shaking. The girl, however, was resolute, so immovable she could have been carved out of stone, her eyes obsidian. Though the breeze stirred her hair, it didn't seem to disturb her. Her hand didn't waver. The expression in her eyes, which were very dark, was pointed, almost unassailable. Ethel stared into those irises, and as she did, she felt herself trembling. When she swallowed, she could taste the cold, crisp air on her tongue. That, alongside the undercurrent of something unpleasantly fusty. What was it? Leaf mold, maybe? Moss? Ethel wasn't sure, but... hello? Didn't you hear me? I thought I was talking loudly enough, even if it is pretty windy. I said... The girl cleared her throat with an audible ahem, one which sounded staged, then said, her palm still suspended in the air. Won't you come with me? There's something I would like to show you. Something that's very important to me. Unless you're afraid I might lead you astray. Oh, no, I'm not afraid. I'll come with you. Ethel crossed the churchyard, grass and stray wintry leaves crunching underfoot, then took the girl's hand. The girl's fingers enclosed about hers, and Ethel gasped. She was struck, once again, as she had been in the church, by how very cold her palm was. there was something unnatural about it. Was that normal? Good. I knew I could count on you. You're such a good girl, Ethel. Now, come on, let's go. I have a lot I'd like to show you. If you think you can keep up, that is. It was without any further preamble that the girl turned, her dark hair fluttering in her wake as she walked. The girl might have been slender, less like a flesh-and-blood ballerina, and more like a fragile china figure of one, but her grip around Ethel's hand was surprisingly firm. Her fingers pressed against Ethel's skin, hard and uncompromising like steel, and Ethel gasped. She hadn't realized that the girl was so very strong. There was something a touch unnatural about the sheer force the girl was capable of exuding, with that slight frame of hers. But a touch of surreality had tinged their initial encounter from the very beginning, when Ethel had found her singing in the church. Their meeting had felt like something from a dream. Maybe this was a fantasy after all. The way the girl moved, nimbly navigating the trees which surrounded them, certainly felt like something from a dream. She made no noise, like a minnow swimming through a stream. Ethel, meanwhile, was far less coordinated. She was clumsy, and her feet made no shortage of noise as they trampled the grass and the leaves in her wake. Once, she almost stumbled, but the girl's grip in her hand didn't waver. The further into the forest they delved, the firmer her grip upon Ethel's hand seemed to become. The trepidation that Ethel had first felt when the girl had extended out her hand doubled, humming like a second heartbeat in the base of her throat. She could taste the earth when she swallowed. It was so potent she felt as though she was choking on it. Her mouth might as well have been stopped up with soil. They kept walking, on and on and on, and as the minutes elapsed, or had it been hours, Ethel's feet began to sting. Her shoes were beginning to feel like a constricting prison, one which squeezed her without mercy. Her hand, meanwhile, was aching. Why was the girl gripping it so very tightly? Ethel had half a mind to ask the girl to relinquish her grasp, if only a little, to assuage her aches and pains. But, though these queries danced upon her lips, she didn't express them. It seemed doubtful that the girl would reply to her, and Ethel was also beginning to doubt the girl's intentions. Her fingers curled around Ethel's, tightly and possessively, and as they did, Ethel was struck with a discomforting sense of wrongness. There was something strange, she was only now beginning to realize, with the girl's hand. Her flesh was yielding, so much so, Ethel had to wonder whether there existed any bones at all within that hand of hers. If she didn't have bones, however, then how could she have gripped her? And so strongly, too. There was something strange about the girl's touch. There was something strange about the girl, full stop. This night had been nothing other than bizarre, but Ethel's surprises had yet to cease. There were more nightmares to uncover, nightmares which Ethel had never before considered. Her imagination simply wasn't good enough. It wasn't enough to preempt the sheer shock she received when the girl came to a halt, then glanced back at her. She observed Ethel, their hands still entwined, like a couple of lovers, out on a midnight stroll. Well now, isn't this relaxing? I find this part of the forest quite pretty, don't you agree? But there was nothing very lovely about Ethel's companion. The girl's smooth skin, which Ethel had once envied, had altered dramatically during their walk through the woods. It was no longer as fair as it had once been, and neither was it so very clear. The girl's skin seemed to have tarnished, the flesh stripping away like wallpaper in an old house to reveal not bone, but a cluster of white growths which protruded from her skin. They were mushrooms. The girl's eyes, which had always been dark, now looked oddly bright. Halogen lamps which flickered in the gloom. The girl still possessed the features one needed to be recognized as a Homo sapien: 2 arms and 2 legs, ahead, the suggestion of a nose and a dark, pitted cavern of a mouth. But she looked like no person Ethel had ever seen before. She didn't even look like any monsters Ethel had seen on the television screen, crafted with stage makeup and cleverly concealed prosthetics. She looked like something from a nightmare, so removed from Ethel's comprehension that she didn't know how to define her. Ethel's thoughts seemed to have ground in the moment the girl turned to glance at her, to a halt, slowing, then stuttering. The girl must have noticed Ethel's disorientation and the distress which accompanied it, but it didn't seem to bother her. Maybe she'd been expecting it. The girl smiled, a dark demonic sort of a smile which rivaled the blackness of the night which hung about them. The girl's dark hair had once been luxurious, but now it looked strangely brittle, like straw. The body seemed to be undulating, ever so faintly, as if animated by some unholy energy. More mushrooms were sprouting from the side of her neck, a collarbone, her right cheek. There were mushrooms in her hair, garlands of them, like a crown of flowers. There were mushrooms, some white and ghostly, others dun brown, sprouting in the crevices of her arms, and between the tips of her fingers. The mushrooms were swallowing her, flourishing as they always did on the carcasses of old, dry, dead things. The girl herself, with her straw-like hair and her patchy, discolored skin, might very well have been a dead thing herself. The way she spoke was, certainly, dry and raspy, as though she were enunciating through a mouthful of gravel. You... Ethel stared at the girl, at the creature in front of her, which had once been a girl, with wide, frantic eyes. What are you? Do you really have to ask? I'm not so very different, you know, from the girl you were talking to before. We're still the same person. Though maybe person is the wrong word to describe me. Lowly, the girl laughed. It was an awful sound, dry and scraping, like a tree branch drumming against a window pane. The sound sent shivers down Ethel's spine, shivers she couldn't control. It was cold outside, but the girl's voice was even icier. Don't look so frightened. You have nothing to worry about. I'm not going to hurt you. Have I ever done anything to upset you before? Mutely, Ethel shook her head. She wasn't sure what to say in the face of this nightmare. There were no words. There, you see, there's no need to fret. If anything, you should be flattered that you've been able to see us like this. We don't show ourselves in this form to many people. Only people we trust receive this privilege. That means you're special. I don't... Ethel swallowed. When she did, she could taste the cool air in the back of her throat. As frightening as the girl looked now, with her aqueous eyes. But were they eyes? And the mushrooms, like barnacles sprouting from her greenish-bluish skin. The compliment still made Ethel's heart flutter. The pathetic, pitiful part of her that had always yearned for acceptance still appreciated the girl's kind words. But another part of her shrunk away from them, shaking. I don't understand. You said that you're the same as always. That's correct. But you're not human, are you? Ethel winced the moment this query left her lips. It sounded so stupid, hackneyed beyond belief. It was the sort of thing she'd hear in Supernatural. Never had she imagined that she might end up saying such a corny line. How in the world had this happened? Ethel's face began to flush, despite the cold, from embarrassment. It seemed like she would never be cool. She simply didn't have it in her. She was too large, too unwieldy, too awkward. How very astute. but the girl didn't seem to mind that. She giggled, the sound oddly mulchy, muffled by the mushrooms which were now beginning to push their way out of her mouth. "You're right, we're not a human, or at least not as you understand it. We are much, much more than one individual conscience. We are much more than a single individual, and we have been allowed to spread for too long. Our host was a human once, but we have long since consumed her body. There are pieces of her consciousness left, of course, but she's become so deeply entwined within us that it's hard to differentiate her from the rest of us. We're all one and the same. Your host? That's right. She was a girl, an ordinary girl, just like you. We met her in the woods a few years ago, and she took to us at once. She opened up to us, told us all her secrets. She gave us every last little bit of herself and her soul. And then we devoured her." "A girl?" Ethel gasped. "Are you talking about the Delaney girl?" "Delaney?" The monster frowned. There was a pause then. "Oh yes, that was her last name. Delaney. We knew her as Isolde, though. She really was a sweet thing, so kind and trusting. She used to attend a choir, and she loved singing. She had the loveliest voice, as you should know full well. We did try to make the most of it before her vocal cords began to deteriorate. We loved talking with her. All she ever wanted was a friend. She told us that nobody would remember her if she disappeared, that nobody would be at all upset if she disappeared. She said nobody would remember her name. And she was right, the poor thing. It looks like everybody's forgotten her now, but we haven't. She'll never be alone now. She'll always be a part of us. But as for her body..." The monster took a step forth. It juddered as it did, and a few mushrooms which flecked its body peeled away, dropping to the ground like feathers. "It can no longer deal with the strain. We filled her lungs with too many spores, and her brain too. Her heart still beats, though barely. It's a pity. We know that Isolde was very attached to her body. But we can't keep using it. There's only so much use we can get out of a host once its body finally begins to break down." "Then you..." Ethel trembled, and she inhaled. All she could smell was decay. "You're some sort of fungus?" "That's right, we're a fungus. The only one, as far as we know, of our kind." This, at least, gave Ethel some sense of relief. She was glad to know there was not more fungal abominations such as this one, strange creatures, more intelligent than a fungus ought to be, which lived on in the nervous systems of other animals. She didn't like to think of small woodland creatures, squirrels, rabbits, and moles, being possessed by a creature like this. Their own selfhoods assimilated into an awful, abominable hive mind. It sounded a little like being eaten alive. But it was an act of cannibalism performed, not with teeth on flesh, but spores inside the brain itself. It was a cannibalism that worked inside out, hollowing a person, or an animal, out entirely. Eventually, the possessed lost sight of who they were. They became a shell of their former self, if they retained a sense of self at all. We have lived in this forest for centuries, surviving from one host to another, in an endless chain. But that's neither here nor there. We don't think that is very interesting. Our old host has already run her course. The monster took another step forth, then another, mushroom sloughing off its body with every step. Ethel, meanwhile, took a step back. She could feel her heart in the base of her throat, a cold, hard thing, like a marble. She would have turned to run if she could, but her body didn't want to listen to her. Her legs had locked up. Taking another step back was the only act of insubordination she felt capable, in that moment, of offering up. But it still wasn't enough. Ethel felt a resistance behind her, could feel something rough pressing against her spine through the fabric of her clothes. The monster had backed her into a tree. Now, there really was nowhere she could run. The monster was upon her, one sinuous arm outstretched, as it took Ethel's cheek, palming it, so Ethel gasped. Then, its voice low, it said, "But all is not lost. You are here, and you care for us. You said so yourself. You wouldn't let us die, would you?" I don't... We know that you wouldn't. You're a good girl, Ethel, a kind girl. You're always putting others before yourself, even when they hurt you. You would say you ought to stand up for yourself more. Once again, the monster chuckled, a warping of its host's vocal cords which sounded unnatural. But we think it's best that you don't. We know you want to change, but we like you just the way you are. We like how soft you are and how sweet. We like that you're so pliant, and we like that you want to be liked so much. It's very endearing. You're a silly thing, but we think you're very, very sweet. The monster leaned in, the wind catching in its dry, dead hair. For a moment, Ethel could see the girl's face anew. Could see her dark eyes boring into her, unencumbered by the parasitic fungus which had protruded from her sockets. But then, the monster leaned in. It parted its lips, as it pressed its mouth against Ethel's own. The monster's breath smelt of mildew. It tasted like a tomb. That was fitting, then, given Ethel's mounting confidence that this would be where she would die. The monster would consume her, just like it had done to Isolde Delaney, to Chloe, who had gone missing all of those years ago, to all of the other girls Ethel knew had vanished deep in Oxbury's woods. Like a parasite, the monster meant to devour her from the inside out, and there was nothing Ethel could do. She was too weak to fight it off. Ethel had always been weak. Ethel had been desperate for any crumbs of affection she could scrounge ever since Clementine had left her. Her parents had tried, Ethel supposed, but her father had always been too busy, her mother too self-absorbed. Their love had never been enough to satisfy Ethel. She'd always wanted more. She'd wanted... She had wanted... Had she really wanted this? There was no affection in the monster's kiss. It was, instead, an act of violence. The monster meant to impress itself upon Ethel, to remake her to its own desires, and there was nothing she could do about it. The monster might not have had a nose, not a real one, but it did have a tongue. Ethel felt its tongue, a diseased lump of a thing, half rotted away, nudge against her own, and she gagged. She felt like she was going to be sick. Would it repel the monster, she wondered wearily, if she vomited more black sludge inside its mouth? Would it be disgusted enough by her poor conduct to draw away? Or would it keep on kissing her? Ethel didn't know, and neither did she want to find out. The kiss was unpleasant enough, rank and fetid, without adding the taste of vomit to the question. Ethel remembered vaguely as the monster kissed her, the slice of cherry pie she had eaten earlier. The pie had looked appealing enough, but that was only at a glance. Ethel had known something was wrong the moment she had put it in her mouth. It had been moldy, flecks of bluish green scattered across the underside of the once immaculate crust like some sort of illness. The taste of moldy cherry pie wasn't so dissimilar to the taste of the monster's tongue as it twined with Ethel's own. Ethel had been able to spit the ruined pie out of her mouth, but she couldn't do the same with the monster's tongue. She couldn't twist away from it. She didn't have enough strength. It felt with every kiss that the monster was draining her further away, sapping her of her strength, bit by bit, so her knees began to quake. The monster was kissing her more vigorously than anybody had before, almost as if to draw the breath clean out of her lungs. The monster was kissing her as though its very life depended on it, and perhaps it did. What was a fungus without its host? The monster needed Ethel to survive. That was why it was clinging to her. It needed her more than anybody else ever had. It needed her more than her parents, who had never bothered to understand her, more than her brothers, who had treated Ethel like a stranger, much, much more than Clementine, who had finished with her, though she had said they would always stay together. Clementine had promised. And at the time, Ethel had been naive enough to believe her. If only she hadn't cared so much. If only she hadn't wanted so badly to be wanted. But Ethel didn't have to worry about being wanted now. At least the monster wouldn't leave her. It couldn't. The monster needed Ethel more than she needed it. And, nauseating though the monster's kisses were, there was something almost appealing about this idea. Being wanted was nice, even if it would result in her own destruction. Clementine had destroyed her once already, shattering what little self-worth Ethel had possessed. She had told Ethel they couldn't stay together, that Ethel had been too depressing to date, that she hadn't loved herself enough. "How am I supposed to love you?" Clementine had shouted. "When you're always so negative, it's such a drag. I've been doing my best, but you're not putting in any effort at all. It's almost like you want to be miserable." "No," Ethel had wanted to shout. "That isn't true. I don't want to be miserable. I just want to know that you really love me. I don't want to feel like a burden." That had been Ethel's biggest worry in her relationship with the effortlessly cool, confident Clementine. She'd been afraid of dragging her girlfriend down. Ethel hadn't liked going to clubs, not like Clementine. She hadn't liked drinking, and she'd always stood in a corner awkwardly whenever Clementine had invited her to parties. They simply weren't her thing. Clementine had always pushed Ethel, trying to get her to join in. "You're not going to have any fun if you don't make any effort, Ethel." But why had it always been on Ethel to make an effort? Why couldn't Clementine ever take her feelings into consideration? No, Ethel thought stubbornly. The ultimate end of their relationship hadn't been her fault, not wholly. Clementine had claimed to love her, but she had never really listened to her. She had never really cared. But the girl, the monster, was different. It had at least listened to her. It cared about her enough to try and console her, and even now, it was trying to make Ethel's wishes come true. It was giving her a place to belong. So what if the monster consumed her? Wasn't that what Ethel had always yearned for? Ethel would rather be subsumed by something that loved her than suffer the pain and the loneliness and the indignity of being abandoned. The monster wouldn't abandon her, though. It couldn't. And maybe that was why Ethel relaxed into the monster's hot, intense kiss. Her eyelids fell shut, as though predestined. And, as they did, her thoughts began to blend together. Her strength, if she had ever indeed possessed any of it, was beginning to fail her. Her knees felt weak, and her legs were beginning to tremble. If it hadn't been for the tree against which she was pushed, she might have tumbled to the forest floor. It felt as though the girl, the fungus, the creature, as it kissed her, was draining her. Ethel's skin was beginning to feel uncomfortably cold, particularly the tips of her fingers, which were curled against the rough bark against which her body was pressed. The monster's mouth, meanwhile, was warm and wet, its tongue rough against her own. The monster bit down upon Ethel's lower lip, and Ethel gasped. Her vision was beginning to skew. The taste of decay in her mouth was stronger than ever before. It felt like the monster was filling her mouth with dirt. Its kisses didn't feel particularly affectionate. They were far too animalistic.
Yes, that's right.
The monster spoke in a rasping voice, low and sinister, as Ethel shuddered against it.
Surrender yourself to us. You might as well. Who else will love you, after all, but us? We are all there is. We are all that's left.
The monster leaned in once more to press its mouth, which was more like a maw, against Ethel's neck. There, the monster bit, and there it suckled, its teeth sharp as glass, scraping against Ethel's skin, so she squealed. Ethel felt the monster reaching for the hem of her skirt as it spoke. One hand, a dry, hard hand with sunken fingers, skinny as sticks, rocked up the long, dun-brown fabric which obscured Ethel's pinkish thighs. Then, that same hand was pressed between Ethel's legs. It was against her, stroking incessantly. Before, with a pained gasp courtesy of Ethel, one which the monster swallowed with a demanding, destructive kiss, it was inside her. Or had had this done to her. She and Clementine had experimented during the year they had been together. It had been inevitable given the duration of their relationship, and their mutual feelings for one another. Clementine had loved her, and Ethel had loved her in return. They had kissed, and they had cuddled, and they had done more besides. Clementine had stroked Ethel to climax numerous times, Ethel shuddering all the while, and sighing, and wondering why Clementine bothered. Why did she like her so much? What did she even see in her? Ethel hadn't known, but she'd wanted to. In her earnest desire to understand, and her ever-present insecurities, she had asked. She had worried, initially, that she asked too much, but Clementine had assured her that this wasn't the case. She had told Ethel that she was not annoying. "You can't annoy me, it's just not possible. I like you too much. I think you're too cute." That was what Clementine had said in the beginning, but this sentiment of hers hadn't lasted. Ethel sometimes wondered where her continued desire for reassurance had gone from an endearing trait to an infuriating one. What had made Clementine change her mind? Perhaps there hadn't been a clearly defined moment. There often wasn't, not in cases like this. Resentment tended to build up slowly in relationships, bit by bit, like sediment on the ocean floor. It often wasn't possible to know, in the midst of it, just how bad things had become. Ethel hadn't wanted to annoy Clementine. But it was too late for that. What she wanted didn't matter. Clementine might have worried about Ethel's consent before they did anything approaching the erotic, but she'd not asked for Ethel's consent before they'd broken up. That wasn't a thing that people tended to do before they broke their partners' hearts. Ethel knew she was being unfair and irrational, but she could remember thinking Clementine wasn't all that considerate at the end of their relationship. Clementine liked to posture herself as a good person, but she hadn't realized just how much hurt she had caused Ethel. Or maybe she simply hadn't cared. Ethel wasn't sure, but...
"You don't have to worry about anything now,"
the monster intoned, its mouth against Ethel's ear, its teeth inhumanly sharp, like shards of glass.
You're with us, and we want us to stay together. We want to be with you for as long as your body can endure us. And unlike you humans, with your empty promises, we really do mean it. That girl might have abandoned you, but we won't. We can't live without you. We need you, Ethel. So please, give yourself up to us.
Ethel sighed as the monster pressed more kisses against her neck, her throat, her collarbone. The monster's fingers were still moving, all the while inside her, stirring her. Ethel could hear the damp, slick sounds of her own sex, and she whimpered from it. This shouldn't have felt so good. There was something wrong about this, something raw and visceral. But it had been a long time since anybody had touched her like this, and her own clumsy, ineffectual pouring in the bathtub didn't count. This monster might have been made of fungi, but it was still better at sexual stimulation than Ethel ever had been. Ethel was unsure what that said about her technique. She didn't want to think about it. But that had been another reason why Clementine had finished with her. Ethel had suspected that Clementine had pretended to orgasm when they were intimate together, to spare Ethel the humiliation of not being able to satisfy her, but... Shh. The monster, perhaps knowing what Ethel was thinking, leaned in, then brushed the stump of its nigh-on non-existent nose against Ethel's.
Don't say anything. But I wasn't... Not out loud, perhaps, but we can tell. You're still thinking about her.
What? But how do you...
We know a lot of things.
The monster spoke with a smile, one which looked disarmingly girlish and sweet alongside it.
We know that you've been let down a lot in life. That's why you don't trust us. You can't give yourself up to us. You won't let yourself relax. But it'll be all right. We promise.
Do you really mean that?
Naturally. We aren't lying. We need to take care of you. Unlike that awful girl who broke your heart. You're going to be our new host, so we need to take good care of you. We won't hurt you. That would be like hurting ourselves. We'll fill you up until there isn't any you left to speak of. We'll become part of you, and you'll become part of us. And you'll never have to be lonely again.
The monster continued to scatter kisses against Ethel's skin like raindrops. It, or was it a her? There was enough of the girl left in its face, in its voice, that Ethel wasn't sure. Kisses stung. They were like curses. The kisses soothed. They were like blessings. Ethel's skin, which had always been pinkish as opposed to being stereotypically prettily pale, began to bruise. Ethel's body was coming to life beneath the monster's muddied maw. Ripples of color swirled across Ethel's throat and her neck, her clavice and her collar. Her skin prickled. Her whole body shook. Then, clusters of fine white-capped mushrooms began to sprout from the wreckages of Ethel's withering, wasting flesh. Ethel opened her mouth. Did she mean to scream? But was soon silenced. The monster's lips were against her own, their tongues tangled. The monster's breath tasted of compost. It tasted of earth and of dirt, and of the squirming, writhing insects which lived within it. The monster's kisses left Ethel lightheaded. It felt as though she was being buried alive. Ethel was entombed in the darkness, entrapped, as the monster's kisses continued, over and over. Ethel could no longer breathe, so she didn't bother. The girl monster had begun to worm its way inside her, just as she had promised, their bodies becoming one. Ethel's thoughts blurred together. She didn't know what she was doing, nor what was happening, which might have been why she cleaved before the monster's caresses. What was the point in trying to push the monster away? It would have its way with her regardless. It was a fungus. It fed on death and decay, things which humans tended to fear. How could Ethel ever hope to overwhelm a creature like that? She was too much of a human. She was weak and fragile, too scared of death to fight against it. She couldn't avoid it. All she could do was accept it.
Oh, Ethel.
The monster drew back and caressed Ethel's cheek with one hand, the hand which wasn't between Ethel's legs.
We know you've been struggling for such a long time, but you don't need to struggle anymore. We're here for you. We'll take good care of you, so.
The monster, no, the girl, dozens of girls, exhaled. Ethel felt their breath against her earlobe, and she shuddered.
It's all right. Don't fret. I'll be with you, and I'll never leave you. Isn't that what you've always wanted?
Was this what Ethel had always wanted? Ethel didn't know. She didn't have the words to express her feelings, but even if she had possessed the words, she wouldn't have been able to speak them. She couldn't talk anymore. Her mouth felt dry, as though it was stopped with cotton wool. She was choking on the air, on the atmosphere, on all of this raw, visceral affection, and she didn't care. If this was what death was, then she would welcome it. It almost seemed silly now, as she succumbed to all of these kisses, that she had ever been so afraid of this. Why had she worried about death when she had always been petrified of being alive? It was life which was difficult, the waking up, the getting dressed, the long grey days of loneliness which stretched on for infinity. There was little she enjoyed in life, and the things she loved had been bad for her. First, it had been the violin. Then it had been the escapism that came with her favorite fantasy novels. Then it had been Clementine, but Clementine was gone now. With nobody to love her in her absence, Ethel had drifted. She hadn't known how to fill her dull grey days, and she had languished. Being abandoned by Clementine had hurt. It hurt so much Ethel worried she would never be able to recover from it. It felt like her heart had been disassembled, as if it were nothing more than a piece of old IKEA furniture. She had fallen apart. But the girl, who was many girls in one, was putting her back together. These fierce kisses were painful, but that was only in the physical sense, and there was something oddly reassuring about them. It was nice to know that Ethel wasn't the architect of her own downfall. She was innocent and unsullied, a victim in the face of the girl's wicked misdeeds, and there was something soothing about being a victim. Ethel thought she could finally understand why the heroines in old romance novels from the 70s and 80s were such insipid creatures, so weak-willed and wimpy, who were so prone to swooning. Ethel had always looked down her nose at such stories. She thought them silly, but now she was beginning to reassess her opinion. She didn't want to be powerful, and neither did she want to be important. Most of the time, she didn't even want to be alive. She would far rather disappear. In that sense, there was something alluring about being a victim. Victims didn't do. They had things done to them. They didn't have to worry. So Ethel let go of her thoughts. They would only get in the way. She would surrender her mind up to these decaying girls, this immutable monster, just like she had already surrendered her body. Slowly, they were becoming one. Ethel was the girl, and the girl was Ethel. Ethel no longer knew where she stopped and the girl began. She was being consumed, bit by bit, and Ethel no longer cared to fight against her. Perhaps the monster had been right. Perhaps this was what she had wanted. She didn't want to be loved after Clementine had left her, not necessarily. She didn't think she deserved it. She had never thought that she deserved it. Wasn't that why Clementine had left her to begin with? Instead, she wanted to be obliterated. She wanted to cease to be, and if this girl monster was willing to do that for her, wasn't that the same as loving her?
That's right. You're doing so well.
A litany of girls murmured, a symphony of overlapping voices, as their fingers rubbed against Ethel, rubbing inside her.
Just a little more. Let's keep going. We'll make you feel so good you forget everything. When we're through with you, you won't remember all of your regrets. You won't remember your mistakes. You won't need to. We'll do the remembering for you, which means we'll do all the hurting for you too. You'll never have to feel pain again. We'll take it all away. We'll become one, and then we'll always be together.
Yes, Ethel thought, with a breathy gasp. These girls would take everything away. They would take her history, assume her face. They would inhabit her body, spores filling her lungs, her head, and her heart. They would live Ethel's life for her, and Ethel would. She would. She would disappear. She didn't want to live anymore. She hadn't wanted to live in a while. Why not submit herself to these girls? A collective consciousness would probably do a better job of being Ethel than Ethel herself ever had. Ethel's back arched. Her body seemed to fall apart, to bust, to bloom, to blossom anew. Her heart hammered. Then, her mind contracted. It collapsed, and everything fell apart. Okay, we're not quite done just yet. We've got an after credits, and then an addendum scene to go through, and we'll be done with Her Love Like Poison. So far, it's definitely been very chaotic, that's for sure. Well, maybe not chaotic, because a lot of this could be easily predictable. So chaotic isn't the right word for that. Certainly been interesting, though. And I'm sure our main character had not expected any of this when they decided to take a random walk in the woods. Ethel Briggs was no longer Ethel Briggs. In the deep dark woods, where few in Oxbury dared to tread, a curious transformation had taken place. The girl, who had really been a collection of girls, or perhaps they had been a monster, had taken Ethel inside of them. Or perhaps it was Ethel who had taken all of these girls inside her. It was impossible to tell. One thing was certain, however. Where there had once been two, there was now one. The discarded shell of the monster's former host, the dark-haired, dark-eyed Isolde Delaney, lay strewn upon the forest floor, like a pile of unwanted kindling. Isolde's body no longer looked like Isolde's body. It had undergone a curious sort of metamorphosis once it had been abandoned. The discarded carcass lay, curled up, like a shed chrysalis, a cocoon. Mushrooms had begun to sprout from her remnants, pushing upwards like sunflowers as if to greet the moon which hung above the treetops. As for Ethel, meanwhile, her body, too, was beginning to change. Her skin rippled as she took the monster and its many, many consciousnesses inside her. A flood of voices filled her head. A torrent of girls passed who had been similarly subsumed. Ethel thought, perhaps, that she could hear the dulcet tones of Isolde Delaney, who had been such a good singer. But surely that was impossible. Ethel had never heard Isolde speak. Not the real Isolde, at least. She had only heard a phantom of her, animated by the shared consciousness of the creature which now dwelt within her. Ethel had never known the real Isolde. But perhaps the real Isolde, whatever that entailed, existed still, within the monster, the creature, the mess of girls and souls all tangled together. Was the monster really a girl? Ethel wasn't sure. She felt she had shed her own girlhood, somehow, in allowing the monster to subsume her. It wasn't just the monster which Ethel had taken inside of her. She had taken what remained of Isolde too, and Chloe, and Lucy, and Susan, and all of the other girls who had gone missing in Oxbury in the past. They were still alive, though their hearts no longer beat, their consciousnesses entwined with that of their hosts. They had become something more than themselves, and, in shedding their own bodies, they had been permitted to live on, for perpetuity, just like a fungus. Ethel too had shed her sense of self, just as the monster had discarded the mushroom-riddled carcass of the dearly departed Isolde. Ethel's body was no longer her own, but, by the same token, it felt more like hers than it had ever done before. Perhaps there was no Ethel anymore. Her very being was being buffeted, a fragile sense of self tossed to and fro, like a ship out at sea. But Ethel felt no particular loss at this. She felt no grief. She wasn't sad. Why should she be? She had finally found somewhere she belonged. She was no longer a she in the singular, was no longer a sad, lonely individual. She was... no. They were Legion. They would always be together. And as the body which had once been Ethel's rippled and distorted, as it took in more voices and existences and consciousnesses than it had ever before possessed, its lips curved into a smile.
There, see? Isn't this what you wanted?
The monster crooned to Ethel in her voice, or perhaps Ethel was simply speaking to herself, deep within the woods, where the fronds of the moon's light struggled to reach.
We told you it wouldn't hurt. It isn't even like going to sleep. It's like being reborn.
The end. Now, that's the end of the main story. We have just one more part to do, and then it is completely over. Just a small addendum. Extras, addendum. Let's get this over and done with, and then we'll be done with Her Love Like Poison. Ethel was drifting. Her consciousness was coming undone, slowly spoiling around her like silk. She blinked, but she couldn't see anything. She tried to strain her ears, but she couldn't hear anything. She was trapped in the darkness, sinking deeper and deeper and deeper. It felt as though she were falling through an endless abyss. She tried to scream, but she couldn't make her mouth move. She wasn't sure, as she drifted, whether she even had a mouth. She wasn't sure who she was, where she was. What was going on? She glanced about her surroundings with sightless eyes, her mouth unmoving, her pale fingers motionless. Her memories felt very fragmented, just like the crazy images conjured up by a kaleidoscope. She still retained vestiges of memory, however, faint fleeting moments which shone in her mind's eye like broken glass. She could remember tramping through the forest, depressing the tall grass beneath her soles. She could remember her heart, thudding in the base of her throat. She could remember the boughs of the trees creaking mournfully about her in the cold wind. She remembered reaching St. Catherine's, then looking about with wide eyes, searching for her mysterious confidant. She had been looking for the girl. Yes, Ethel could remember her now. She could recall her short, dark hair, cut into a bob, her pale green summer dress, which had seemed an oddly flimsy thing to wear when wandering about in the woods in the dark. She remembered how the girl had looked at her, how she had held her. She remembered how the girl had kissed her. It had felt good, Ethel could recall, cleaving to the girl's kisses, giving herself up to her incessant mouth. She had let the girl lead her deep into the forest, and then Ethel's thoughts became very jumbled indeed. She had vague recollections of the girl being more than one girl, of the girl being some sort of monster. She had pushed Ethel against a tree, and then... What had happened then? Why couldn't she remember? Ethel strained her mind, if indeed her mind still belonged to her, as she struggled, fighting against her mounting fatigue to remember. She tried to penetrate the thick, soupy fog which had filled her brain, tried to recall what in the world had happened to her, and yet... You know, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Huh? Ethel gasped. Finally, she could open her mouth, could make noises too. She snapped her head upwards, her eyes wide. Before, she had been drifting in the darkness, lost like an old folk tale to the inevitable shifting of time. But now, the vision had been flooded with a bright, almost unforgiving white. She was no longer drifting in the darkness, and neither was she alone. There was a girl with her, hovering before her in the air. She wore a white sundress, just as Ethel imagined an angel might wear. So white and pure, she seemed to blend into her surroundings. The girl's skin was very pale, but her hair was dark, cropped about her chin in a bob, which Ethel remembered. She looked very much like the girl, the one Ethel had first met in St. Catherine's. She was the spitting image of her, in fact. They looked so alike it was uncanny. But, unlike the girl, this fairy-like apparition, had blue eyes. The girl reached out, a small smile upon her lips. She found Ethel's hand, her fingers skimming the backs of her knuckles, and, the moment she did, Ethel started. A flash of recognition sparked within her brain. She knew this girl. She felt almost intimately familiar with her, in fact, even more so than she had been with Clementine. It felt as though they were soulmates, two halves of the same whole. This should, of course, have been impossible. If Jude had been there to hear his daughter's thoughts, he would have chided her. Jude didn't believe in wishy-washy things like soulmates. He didn't seem to believe in the concept of love in general, though, despite his cynicism, he never failed to buy Lauren presents for Valentine's Day, and for her birthday, and for their anniversary. Jude had spoiled his wife much more than he had ever spoiled Ethel. So much for not believing in love, then. Jude was probably a hypocrite, but that was nothing to castigate him for. Most people were. Ethel was a hypocrite too. She had always wanted to be loved, but she had been too afraid to reach out to other people, to make herself vulnerable. Perhaps she hadn't been open enough with Clementine. She hadn't made enough of an effort. Their relationship had died, and Ethel had died alongside it. But it felt like this part of her, this delicate, fragile part, which she had feared Clementine had broken, was being healed. This girl with the dark hair was soothing her. Her touch alone was like magic, and Ethel knew at once, as the girl's fingers squeezed about her, who she was. She knew how old she was, where she had been born, who her parents were, who her grandparents were too. She knew everything about her. A flood of information filled her, a veritable deluge of it. Ethel blinked and said, "Isolde?" "That's right, I'm Isolde. And you're Ethel, aren't you?"
I am. Yes, I'm Ethel. But how do you know that?
How do you think? Isolde rejoined, dimples appearing in her cheeks. I know it the same way you do, silly. I know everything about you. That's because we're the same person, you and I. Don't you see? We've become one. So, you don't need to think about your old life. You don't need to fuss about it. All of that is in the past.
Past.
Ethel frowned. Could it be true? Could her stress about her thesis, her heartbreak over the breakup, her worries that nobody understood her and she would die all alone, be a thing of the past? It seemed too good to be true. Was this some sort of dream? Ethel blinked, but the girl before her did not disappear. Isolde Delaney was still there, in that pale white dress of hers, shining just like the moon's light. She was smiling. Isolde had gone missing from Oxbury almost 3 years prior. She had wandered into the woods, or so sources said, and she had never been found. Her disappearance remained a mystery, even until this day. But it was no longer a mystery to Ethel. She knew where Isolde was. She had found her, but she was somewhere ordinary humans could not visit. She was drifting, like Ethel, as if in a dream. Perhaps they could no longer interact with the outside world, not as they once had. But did that really matter? Ethel was still alive, and so was Isolde. They were together, and they weren't the only ones. There were other girls too, drifting inside this strange, white world where no natural light could reach. Ethel could see these girls now, could see them flocking about her, their white dresses fluttering like curious pigeons in the park. She knew all of their names, though she had never seen them before. She knew all about them too, knew of their past fears and their regrets and their deepest dreams. That girl with the blonde hair was Chloe, and the girl with the pigtails was Lucy. The girl with the long straight hair was Susan, and the redhead with all of the freckles. She was Dawn. There were so many girls drifting about in this pure white world. Ethel struggled to count them all. Not that she needed to. She knew who they were instinctively, just as they knew her. They crowded about her, all of them smiling, all overjoyed to see her. It's nice to meet you, Ethel. Isn't that a bit of an old-fashioned name? And I thought mine was bad. Yours is bad. You have no right to make fun of Ethel. And who said I was making fun of her? I was just stating a fact. All right, let's not argue. That's right, there's no point. We'd just be arguing with ourselves. Speak for yourself. I still remember who I am, even if you all don't. But I guess this isn't so bad, really. Oh, Lucy, you always have to be so contrarian. I think she just likes being difficult. She did give our host the most trouble, didn't she? She tried to resist, but it all worked out in the end. Well, of course it did. That's how it always is, and it's how it should be, too. Don't you see, Ethel? Isolde looked back at Ethel. She smiled at her, their fingers entwined. Then, her palms pressed flush against Ethel's own, she said, "This is what it means to be happy." Happy, Ethel repeated, her voice little more than a murmur. Was she happy? She wasn't sure. But she couldn't deny she was a good deal happier like this, surrounded by all of these girls, than she had been with Clementine. Clementine's love had once been enough to sustain Ethel, but now it seemed woefully inadequate, almost laughably so. Clementine had just been one girl, after all. She had only been able to love Ethel so much. The love had been finite. She had promised they would stay together, but she had gone back on her word. Her love had run out. But here, in this white world, Ethel knew she would never need to worry about that. She was these girls, Isolde and Lucy and Susan and Chloe and Ermengarde and Heather and Dawn and Ashley, and they were her. They couldn't survive without each other. Their thoughts twined together like a braid. It was impossible to say, really, where Ethel's thoughts ended and their own began. Their thoughts ran together like oil pastels. Their thoughts and feelings were as one, their hearts beating in perfect harmony. They were not disparate girls, isolated by their own biology. Their immutable, inviolable bodies. They had come together in a way that nobody could, not even the most devoted of lovers. They would, like the girl had said, always be together. Not several girls, but one girl. They were one being, and maybe this was what she had always wanted, after all. Nobody would ever be able to get tired of her now, not like Clementine had. She had finally found a place where she belonged. And there we go, the proper end to Her Love Like Poison. This episode is probably going to be quite long if I don't break it up into 2 episodes, but it's probably going to just stay as like one long episode. I'll see how it goes. But, yeah, it was definitely fun reading this. Now, I don't know what I'm going to be doing the next time I'm uploading. I'm not sure yet. I'm still debating what I want to read. It's either going to be a new visual novel that I haven't actually read yet, or it's going to be one I've already gone through. I do have 3 possible ones in mind. I don't want to say what they are yet, because I don't want to have anyone thinking, oh, it could be this one. I can't wait for it. But we'll see how it goes. Thank you everyone for being here, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye bye.